And next up, we welcome John Willescroft. He's the International Procurement Director, or CPO, at G4S. I'm sure he'll tell you a lot more about G4S during the presentation. John is an ambitious, energetic and commercial CPO, specialising in reshaping procurement in large and complex organisations. And to put some numbers on that, for instance, G4S, that operates in 90 countries and he has more than $1 billion of spend. Welcome, John, for the next session. John.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's well. Are you all good? Pretty good response. I'm John Willescroft. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at G4S. So today you can see I'm talking about sustainability, but I'm talking about it through a specific lens at G4S, but I think also applies to probably all, or certainly most procurement organisations, which is that when I look back and reflect on kind of my 20-odd years career to date, when I started off, most of what I was doing was, I guess it was sourcing, it was contracting, it was running lots of auctions, which was loads of fun, but it's pretty one-dimensional, and I think any of us who work in procurement, who have been around for the last 10, 20 years, have seen that massive broadening in procurement accountability, in the pull for procurement from across organisations. And we've transitioned, haven't we, through from, classic sourcing commercial management through to proper supplier management and SRM, through to supply chain resilience, through digitisation, through to ESG and sustainability. So it's been growing massively for, I think, 20 years. And over the last 5 years or so, I'd argue it's been growing more exponentially than ever before. So if we look at that, I think we can all probably agree that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the profession because it's creating more pull for procurement. It's dragging procurement to the heart of organisations. It's a good thing, I think, intellectually. It's just more interesting. It's multidimensional. At an individual level, I think whether you're starting your career in procurement or you're running large procurement teams, it's good for personal development. It's stretching people outside of their day job. I think anyone in my team should be able to challenge me and say, why am I not spending time on things outside of my kind of traditional day job? And everyone's got opportunity, so it's all good, right? Except there is an elephant in the room that I don't think people talk about as much as they should, which is, whilst we've seen that broadening, at the same time, in most organisations, if not all organisations, the size of procurement teams, the funding for procurement, the number of people, it might have grown a little bit, it might not have grown at all, but it certainly hasn't grown commensurate with the expectations and the breadth of what we're being asked to do. And that creates an obvious big tension, which is, what do we do about that? The ask is growing, the teams, the resources are largely static. You can do a number of things. I guess you could say, well, we'll just sweat our teams really, really hard. We'll get people to work weekends and evenings and Christmases, which I did put to my team, but they weren't, massively keen on. You could say, well, look, we can't step up to the mark with some of these things. We can't help because it's going to detract from what we're really about on our core competence. And I don't think any of us want to be in that space either for obvious reasons. So where we're left with is where we probably all are, which is we are stepping up to the mark on areas like sustainability and ESG, but naturally it's spreading us quite thinly across lots and lots of different things. I read a really interesting stat, I think it was the Deloitte CPO survey recently, that identified that in many procurement teams, I think there's a huge increase in the proportion that were missing cost savings targets and commercial targets. And that's not a kind of coincidence. That's clearly as a result of being spread really thin. And that's, for me, is quite a worrying sign. So for my money, procurement's got a broad role in organisations, but the heart of it has to be commercial management of your supply chain and your supply base. And I think if we start to dilute that too much, we're in a bad place. So that's a little bit of context about, I'm talking about sustainability, but through the lens of trying to implement and embed it in a low margin, complex global business without taking our eye off the ball on other really important things around cost management, managing inflation, supplier management, SRM, supply chain risk management. So, a little bit about G4S. When I joined G4S 5 years ago, I knew the name. You probably know the name, but we're a B2B business. We're not a B2C business in most parts of the world. So you may, in your professional capacity, have invited G4S to tenders, but we're a global security company. So we're part of Allied Universal Group. We're the world's largest security company. We operate across the world. Largely, our core business is security services. So it's men and women in G4S branded uniform securing airports or sites or events. We also offer technology services as well. We run cash management. So in the UK, you've probably seen the blue G4S cash vans zipping around the place. And hopefully you might have seen some of our new fully electric cash vans in the UK. We've got a big FM business, particularly in the UK, but also in areas like Saudi and Brazil. We offer consulting services. And last but not least, we offer services to the care and justice sector. So in particular in the UK and in Australia, we run prisons on behalf of government. So we've got kind of a broad spread in terms of services. One thing I didn't know coming into G4S is we're a truly global organisation. We have over 700,000 employees, which is a lot of employees, spread across the world. We operate in a lot of countries. The number changes. It says 100 there, so we'll go with 100. Operate in 100 countries with 20 billion of revenue, which is a challenge for me as a CPO trying to manage cost, get control, and drive things like sustainability programs across such a complex, vast business. So a little bit about procurement. So my team headquartered in London. I've got a global category team that sits mainly in the UK. But most of the team, of the 150 people in procurement at G4S, sit out across the world, across over 80 markets. So I've got regional procurement leads, I've got a global category team, and I've got some shared services resources. But as you can imagine, the biggest headache, or I guess you'd call it a challenge, more positive wording, is how do I, as a CPO at G4S, do things like leveraging our spend across that complexity? How do you go about driving consistency of policies and standards and processes across all those markets and across all those people? And when it comes to things like sustainability, which I will get onto, I promise, how do you even start in that lens of finite resources and finite budgets? How do you really make a step change in our supply chain sustainability standards? It is a real challenge. So all I'm going to talk about in terms of our sustainability journey is three lessons. Not lessons because we've been through it and we're there and we've kind of reached utopia. We're very much wrestling with all the things that everyone's wrestling with in terms of sustainability. But a few years into our journey now, I think there's three things that we've really taken on board and is now helping us adapt how we go forwards. And I thought I'd share it. Hopefully there's one or two things that you can sit here and look at and take away as things you might want to take back into your own businesses. The first one is quite a basic one, or pretty obvious one, which is what's really important to the business, or to your business, or to your organisation that you work in. So sustainability is a broad church, as we know. There's lots of things you can and may choose to do. But actually, again, through that lens of wanting to maximise the outputs from a finite set of budgets and resources, where do you focus your time and effort? So number one, have we got really clear exec sponsorship of all of our programs? Again, it sounds like a fairly obvious thing, but actually the first thing, you look at G4S, we're a people business. We've got 700,000 employees. So immediately you look at areas like labour and human rights and modern slavery risks, or you look at diversity, equity and inclusion, which are really core to our own business. So immediately that's got to be core to what we care about with our supply chain. So mirroring the things in terms of our supply chain sustainability with what the business actually cares about within the DNA of the business has been a real learning point. Two, visible short and long-term targets. Again, it was talked about, I think, earlier in the PepsiCo presentation about getting really clear ESG targets. Now, again, you might think it's a fairly obvious point, and it is fairly obvious in areas like carbon reduction. So if we're saying, actually, we want to take more CO2 out of the atmosphere through our supply chain, well, that's fine. Setting targets is relatively easy. You can set your scope 1, 2, and 3 targets. Measuring it, a pain in the backside, I think we all know accurately, but the actual setting of targets, pretty straightforward. But actually, if one of your ambitions is to, as it is for us, to remove the risk of modern slavery across our supply chain, which is expansive and global, what things do you measure? Because what you measure is clearly going to drive what you do and the results. So you could start and say, well, I want every supplier in my supply chain to have labour and human rights standards above a certain level, and that's how I'm going to measure, and success equals that 100% have that. Is that measure right, though? Is that definitely what you want to do? So you start looking around the world and you find suppliers who are under that threshold, who aren't meeting those standards. What do you want to do? Because if that's your measure, you terminate with the suppliers and you find a new supplier and you replace them. Is that the responsible thing to do? Is that helping shape the market? Or do you want to work with those suppliers and support them and collaborate and try and up their standards? Arguably, I think we want to do the latter. Well, you've got to target the right things then, because they're different outcomes. And the third one is, again, it's been talked about a little bit in some earlier sessions, but about choosing the right third parties and partners to help accelerate your journey. Again, through the lens of not having infinite, bottomless budgets and resources, choosing the right third parties to support the journey is really important. And at G4S, we look at two things very clearly. One, if I'm going to use a third party to help my sustainability journey, one, is it actually providing genuine expertise I don't have, I haven't got ready access to? Or two, even more importantly, is it helping us accelerate? Is it helping us do things quickly and easily and get to the output quicker? And that's really important. And when you look at how we've set our strategy at G4S, we've got 4 pillars of sustainability. We've got supply chain transparency, which is, do we understand across all of our suppliers, across all those markets, who they are and what their basic standards are before we do anything else? Then on top of that, where we really want to invest our time and effort are in areas which are carbon, which are labour and human rights, and which are diversity, equity and inclusion. So we've got a range of partners we're working with. We're quite selective about who we work with because, you know, we do have finite budgets and we need to spend every pound really carefully. A few examples, I won't talk through all of them, but Integrity Next, we partner with because they help us accelerate our supply chain transparency journey really fast. So when we go to a new market using Integrity Next, typically in 6 to 8 weeks, we can kind of lift the lid and uncover the standards on probably 60 to 70% of our suppliers in that market. We can do that really quickly. It would take us a lot longer and more effort to do that ourselves in-house. EcoVadis is a bit different. Many of you probably use EcoVadis for sustainability assessments. When you look at the types of suppliers we have at G4S, 70% of our suppliers are SMEs, and you look at the types of markets we operate in, APAC and Middle East, and the maturity of suppliers, that is more effort. Getting suppliers and coaching them through it, and conditioning them and getting them through EcoVadis takes time and effort. So we can't do it everywhere. What do? Well, we focus very, very clearly and trying to be as precise as possible on which markets and which supply chains we're really concerned about and do it properly. So less is more, being very, very clear, and we'll come on to data in a minute and why that's important, but being really precise about specifically where do you see the risk and where do we see the risk in our business and where do we really want to get under the skin of that supplier. And the third one I'll mention briefly, it's a new relationship, which is SourceDog. We just started working with SourceDog for our core e-sourcing, supply management and contract management platform. And why did we choose SourceDog? Well, I chose SourceDog because it's a functional system, but most importantly, it's easy to use. It's intuitive, and I don't just mean for my internal team, but also for suppliers. You know, the maturity of our supply base is mixed. Therefore, finding platforms and way of collaborating and interfacing with G4S, it's simple, intuitive, doesn't require training, and the same for my own team is really important. The second kind of lesson, if you want to call it that, is I've called finding the sweet spot, which is we've set our 4 priority areas of sustainability and where we want to focus, but then actually, where do we invest each hour of my team's time or each pound spent with third parties? Which projects do we spend our time on? Because we need to maximize the outputs, and you can very easily be busy fools, I think, in this space. So we've got to the point now where we ask 3 really simple questions when thinking about, do we want to invest time or effort or money on this? The first is a blindingly obvious one, which is it going to do good? Is it actually going to drive a positive change? So if I'm talking about carbon reduction, am I working with a supplier that actually the emissions are high and I've got an opportunity to reduce it? If I'm talking about supplier diversity, is this project really going to shift the needle in terms of how we engage with our diverse supplier population or work with more diverse suppliers? So it's a really obvious one. Second, slightly less obvious one is it going to drive a really good commercial business outcome? So we're a low margin business, we've got lots of competing priorities. That's not a sustainability outcome, but actually if we're trying to accelerate it and get engagement and get the business behind it and to drive things quickly, it's very, very helpful if the projects are driving a clear, or there's a clear line of sight to a business outcome, whether that's cost reduction, whether that's efficiency, whether that's customer retention or supply performance. And thirdly, is it exciting? Is it going to generate some kind of positive PR or excitement, or is it a good story? And that's really important. Again, if what we're trying to do is create a virtuous circle of change here with a relatively finite amount of resource, it's really important that what we do actually creates a bit of a virtuous circle of change. So you can put these three together, and I couldn't not have either a 2x2 matrix or a Venn diagram in my presentation, so I've gone Venn. I hope you like it. But clearly, there's two of those three spots that you want to be, and there's one you clearly don't want to be. Sustainable value creation, you're doing good, you're driving positive sustainability change, and you're driving good business outcomes. That's clearly a good place to be, right? You might not be creating the momentum for future change, but it's a good place to be. Doing good, so shifting the needle, well, whatever that be, whether that's carbon reduction or improving labour and human rights standards, whatever it is. Doing good, and also creating a good story and PR and press and visibility and awareness. Also a great place to be. You might find it a little bit harder if you haven't got the business outcomes. It might be a bit harder to actually drive in the business, potentially, but a good place to be. We certainly don't want to be at the bottom. We certainly don't want to be in the greenwashing space where all we're doing is driving some business outcomes, or the business feels like we're discharging our obligations so they can put it in a company report and we can talk about it and it's good PR. That's the kind of classic greenwashing space where we certainly don't want to be. Quite evidently, where we want to be is right in the middle, whereby we're creating sustainable value and we're generating momentum. So a great example of this is vehicle electrification, so where we've driven our fleet from diesel and petrol cars to fully electric cars. It does all three of those if you think about it. It takes CO2 out of the atmosphere, it's going to tick. It's generating good business outcomes because we're meeting our net zero obligations and our customers want us to do that, tick. And it's a good story, it's visible, people get it, it's symbolic of change and intent for the organisation. And to be clear, that doesn't mean we only work in that middle space. So if there's things in the top which are blatantly good things to do that are going to shift the sustainability needle, of course we'll do them. It's not about saying we only want to be in the middle. It's about saying where are you going to prioritise your effort, what are you going to start with, and how are you going to choose where to start and what to do next. And the third one is data. I don't know why I said it 3 times. I think I got overexcited, but I guess I was just trying to make the point that it's important. And I think there's a temptation, and I think we found that temptation early on, which is you kind of want to crack on and you want to do stuff and you want to shift the needle in terms of whatever your sustainability topics are. And that's very tempting, but, and maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but without really good data, there's a risk that you're just working blindly and you don't mean to greenwash, but that's what you end up doing. You're very busy, you're doing lots of stuff, you're talking about it, but are you actually driving positive change? Well, you don't know if you haven't got the data. You don't know if, first of all, you're not really clear on which of your markets or your business units or your supply chains within those markets, where does your real risk sit or the opportunity sit? So if it's carbon, clearly you need to know who your high-emitting suppliers, right? You need to know that if you want to reduce carbon, it's an obvious starting point. But you also want to know for carbon, which markets am I able to actually make traction in? So if I try and electrify our fleet in South Africa and all we're doing is burning coal to create the electricity, we're not shifting the sustainability needle. We think we're doing a great job and working on great programs, but we're not shifting it. So if we're not really clear, and it's the same with labour and human rights, do I know which of my markets I should be most concerned about in terms of labour and human rights abuse and modern slavery? Am I clear on that? And within those, which supply chains, where do I really need to focus on? Because if I'm focusing on the wrong area, if I'm just doing modern slavery audits in the UK, where it is still an issue in the UK, but it's not like it is in other parts of the world, then, I'm looking in the wrong place. And 2, clearly, once I've defined that, am I really clear on what my sustainability indicators are? And I do have good data that shows me how I'm performing across each of those markets and each of those pillars. If I don't know how I'm performing and how it's tracking over time, how do I possibly know that I'm actually moving in the right direction? And clearly, 1 and 2 are all about action. It's all about, as we all know, you need data. Data creates insights. Insights create action. And all any of us are trying to do in the area of sustainability, I hope, is to drive the right action and the right results. And so I think if we're starting sustainability programs and we haven't got data absolutely right, doesn't mean you shouldn't start, but I think you just need to be cautious and make sure that actually what you're doing is driving what you think you want to achieve. So look, those are the 3 lessons. I hope there's something in that either chimes with you and your teams or actually is giving you food for thought. I've got a few final things I wanted to mention before I finish. One is that clearly sustainability as a topic is constantly evolving. The needs and wants across the world are changing, and I mean that both in terms of legislation that's clearly changing at a national level, and lots of EU legislation coming down the line, of course, but also customer expectations. What do your customers want? Because that's not static. So actually trying to build a sustainability program, but also build agility into that so we can constantly move and tack to the right place to meet the requirements of our customers and governments is really important. Secondly, it's complex doing it across a global business. Sustainability demands obviously vary massively. So we're looking at supplier diversity. Well, if you're looking at supplier diversity in the UK, it's a very different program than it is in South Africa with Triple B, or it is in Saudi Arabia, or it is in Australia. Wildly different programs. The word diversity means something wildly different for a start. And what you can do and what you should do is very different. So that doesn't mean you can't have a global program and you can't create intent, absolutely, but the understanding and then the flexibility in how you approach it in each of those markets needs to be very sensitive to that. The third one, I think the previous panel were talking about third-party providers and technology providers in particular. There's lots of third parties, as we all know, offering solutions in this space. Some of them are brilliant, some are good, I think some are probably less good. But our learning is being really, really clear on what the value add is. What is it doing? What is that third party offering you? For us, are they giving you real expertise? Are they really helping you accelerate your journey? If you can't really answer that clearly, you probably shouldn't be working with them, I guess. AI is another one that's probably being talked about as a buzzword a lot at this conference. That's got to continue playing a larger and larger role. I talked about the challenge with data. It's a massive challenge. I really want AI to be helping us answer that. I'm not convinced it's there yet. So, for example, do you need to collect data from all your suppliers directly to understand their standards, or can you use AI to do that? I think a lot of third parties would say the latter, that you can use AI, but from what I've seen of it, I don't think it's quite there. I don't think it's reliable. I don't think it gives you the robust view that you need. But clearly, fast forwarding, it's going to answer some of those questions. And then finally, I think my last reflection is that I quite like coming to these events because you talk to other organisations and you see what other people are doing, and you find it's quite cathartic because you find that everyone's in the same boat. We're all trying to do the right thing. We're all coming across the same challenges, and we're all kind of making it up a little bit as we go along. So sometimes we're taking one step backwards before we can take 2 steps forward. And I think that's okay, and particularly with sustainability where it's an evolving landscape, we're all trying to do the right thing. And I think the important thing is that we keep pushing forward, and that actually conferences like this and sharing approaches and what we're doing is incredibly powerful. So thank you for listening. I hope that was useful, and thanks.